In today's class, we're going to talk about responsive design using CSS. So the topics that we're going to cover, we're going to first begin with a review of what responsive design is, and then we're going to take a look at media queries, okay? And then next we're going to take a look at flex property, which is also in CSS, which is the fairly newer way to deal with responsive design in the world of CSS. But first, let's begin with talking about what responsive web design means. Responsive web design is what makes your web page look good on all devices. Okay, so every device has a different screen width, right? And of course, when you go from a desktop to a smaller laptop to a tablet to a phone, these differences are more profound. So what we're doing in responsive web design is trying to make sure that our CSS can help adjust the website to the different screen sizes. So responsive web design uses only HTML and CSS. Note that responsive web design is not a program and it doesn't use JavaScript or any other coding other than HTML and CSS. Okay, so web pages can be viewed using many different devices, as I mentioned, desktops, tablets, and phones. So your web page should look good and be easy to use regardless of the device that it's on. So web pages should not leave out any information to fit smaller devices, but rather adapt its information or adapt its content to fit any device. So use CSS and HTML to resize, to hide things that are not necessary, to shrink, or maybe to enlarge. Because when your screen size gets smaller, you most likely are going to have to, tap on the screen instead of using a mouse that has a bit more precision. So sometimes things actually have to be larger even though your screen size is smaller, such as a button or things like that. And you also have to move the content around to make it look good on any screen. So, making things fit onto a smaller screen doesn't mean that everything just has to shrink down. Rather, you have to take a look at what's available, what the available space is to you now, and how does the user, interact with that space. Okay, so first we have to talk about the viewport. The viewport is the user's visible area of a web page. The viewport varies with the device. It's smaller on a mobile phone than on a computer screen, of course. And before tablets and mobile phones, web pages were designed for computer screens only. So a long, long time ago, only computers, you only looked at websites on computer screens, not on phones or tablets. Those things didn't exist then. So when people made websites back then, it was made only for a larger screen. And of course now that's different. Anyway, so it was common for web pages to have very static design and a very fixed size, very controlled size, right? But with, the advent of tablets and phones, fixed web pages are now too large to fit into a viewport. You can't just shrink everything down because it would be impossible to see the content, right, without having to zoom in. Okay, so to fix this, browsers on those devices actually did scale the entire web page down just to fit the screen. So you had these like tiny writing and small little pictures and nothing that you could click on. Then you had to zoom in and kind of move around and take a look at it. So yuck, that's how it was like in the early days. But thankfully, that's not so much the case anymore. HTML5 introduced a method to let web designers take control over the viewport through the meta tag. So include the following meta viewport element in all your web pages. So meta, name, viewport, content is width equals device width, initial scale, and so on. So we'll add this when we do our exercises. So what this does here, this meta tag here does, viewport element does here, is that it gives the browser instructions on how to control the page's dimensions and scaling. the width equals device width sets the width of the page to follow the screen width of the device, which will vary depending on the device. So the initial scale 1.0 part here sets the initial zoom level when the page is first loaded by the browser. Okay, and one thing to remember is you should never have horizontal scrolling unless you're a very good designer and very experienced and you're doing it for a very good reason. But if you're just starting out and you don't have any design experience, make sure that you do not end up with accidental or intentional in any way any kind of horizontal scrolling. Do not use large fixed width elements. If an image is displayed at a width wider than the viewport, it can cause the viewport to scroll horizontally. Then you have to like scroll to the side to see the rest of the image. So never have your image, set at a fixed width like 800 pixels. Always use a percentage width, or make it 100% of its container. Make that container flexible, meaning a percentage width. Okay, otherwise it could cause a horrible, ugly horizontal scrolling. Make sure you adjust the content to fit within the width of the viewport. Do not let the content rely on a particular viewport width to render well. Okay, so make sure that your page is going to look good on any viewport width, not just one particular one. Okay, so you can't make the website only work for one situation. People are going to look at your website in so many different screen sizes, on so many different browsers, on so many different devices. You can't create a fixed width or a fixed anything, okay, in the world of web design, especially not today. Screen dimensions and width and CSS pixels vary widely between devices. Content should not rely on any particular viewport width to render well. Okay, you can't say, oh, they're just looking at it in the wrong width or wrong browser size or wrong device. There is no wrong device or wrong browser size. It is the designer's fault. The designer, as you as a designer, should be designing it for as many as possible different sizes and different devices. Okay, so use CSS media queries to apply different styling for small and large screens. Use relative width values, meaning the flexible widths like the percentage. Be careful of using large absolute positioning values. So I know that we've learned how to use positioning values to kind of position something that we want somewhere. So avoid using large values. Like if you use like 5 pixels or something like that, that should be fine. But avoid using like 200 pixels somewhere and 500 somewhere, and it could really, sometimes 500 is the entire screen width, right? So it may cause the element to fall outside of the viewport on small devices. So stay away from using large absolute positioning values. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is media queries, but I'm going to do that in the next video. So I hope this short video gave you a good introduction to what responsive design is, why it's important. And in the next video, we're going to continue on with the media queries, and for that video, to prepare for it, please go and download the exercise files where I've prepared for you just a simple HTML index HTML page and a CSS page, and then you're going to add to it as you watch the next video.